Welcome to Rich Conversations. Today we'll chat with paleontologist Tim James. This episode was such a joy to record. Tim and I have been following each other on social media for like 3 years. So he'll see posts that I have of like natural history museums and other historical museums, learning and reading about history and, just exploring my curiosity overall. And then on his, I see him, he lives out in South Dakota. And so he's out in the Badlands. He's just out in the American West going on expeditions and posting photos of fossils and everything. And it's just so cool. I just love it. He happened to be in Chicago, so we met up, and you can tell by the audio. The audio is going to be kind of loud. There's a lot of city life noises you're going to hear, buses, traffic, horns. And it's interesting that we're talking about paleontology during this time too, but it was such a great conversation, and I'm so proud to share this with you. I had so much fun. You can follow Tim at DinoGuy1997. Let's begin. So I'm joined by Tim James, and Tim and I have been friends on Instagram for like maybe 3 years or so.
Yeah, something like that.
What's exciting to me, so I go to museums, natural history museums, and if you follow the things that I do, you know that already. And when I'm in the museums, I'm always thinking like, what is it like for people out discovering this stuff and cleaning it, and it's got to be so cool just to be out west, because the American West is known for a lot of fossils and paleontology. And so then I live vicariously through Tim here, and it's awesome. So he was in Chicago, he's in Chicago now, and we met up. So here he is.
So hi, yeah, I'm Tim. That was a really nice introduction, Rich. Thank you very much. I'm a big fan of yours as well, man. So I really appreciate the chance to get to be on this podcast. I think you bring up a really good point there. Working with paleontology is a really unique thing. I really don't think there's any other job that's like it, except for maybe working as an archaeologist. And I do that as well. The cool thing about working as a paleontologist is there's never a dull day. It's always something interesting, and it's always an adventure. And sometimes it's an adventure when you don't want it to be. There's a lot of times where I find myself working out in the field, digging up a dinosaur. For example, I was working with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science in Grand Staircase National Monument in Utah. That was in 2016. During that time, it was actually the largest continuous monument in the 48 states, the lower 48. So that was a lot of fun. What we were doing is we were excavating this big ceratopsian. It was a new species of frilled dinosaur, kind of like Triceratops. And we were digging this thing up, and all of these crazy storms came in, and we had to recede back to our camp, and we had to like literally run while the Badlands are melting all around us.
Whoa.
We're running up and down, people are sliding, it's getting wild, and flash flooding out there in the Badlands where we find fossils. Flash flooding can be a really crazy thing. So, we run back and we get back into camp. And, there's these big gullies right on either side of the camp. And we didn't really think about it before we set our camp up, which was probably a big mistake on our part. Because when we woke up in the morning, the camp had become an island. So we had to sit in the rain and drink Kahlua at 8 a.m. and just try to warm up, huddle together, and tell old stories. But, that's the best way I could describe what it's like to work in the field in paleontology. Every day is different. You'll go through field sessions. Like, for example, Tiktaalik was this, really early ancestor of, reptiles and amphibians back in Nova Scotia. The guy going out to dig up this fossil always knew it had to be somewhere because he had studied the geology of that era. Now, I'm a Cenozoic paleontologist, so I don't know too much about way back when, but I can tell you the cool thing about
Describe Cenozoic for people that don't know what that is.
Oh, so the Cenozoic is any time after the extinction of the dinosaurs. So I study everything from ancient mammoths to gomphotheres, which we'll talk about a little later, to, terror birds and, the Oreodonts of the Eocene period.
Yes.
All of that is real big in South Dakota.
While Tim's talking about stories in the field, we are kind of now in the field. We are downtown Chicago, and so there's going to be trucks and cars and traffic and horns. So this is the urban field right here.
Oh, yeah, we're sitting right across from the Bean looking at all this really pretty COVID barricades and everything. So hope you guys enjoy the ambiance. Anthropologically speaking, this is a pretty fascinating time in American history, so we should all be lucky to live it. I guess we understand now why the saying, "May you live in interesting times," is a curse.
That's certainly true. Now, what does your daily life look like?
Well, I put my pants on just like everybody else.
Oh, so you do?
Oh, yeah, sometimes I don't. It's nice to go to the museum a little free-balling, but I'm just kidding. I don't actually do that. That's not professional. But, what I do is I wake up, have a cup of coffee, walk out, drive through the Black Hills. Sometimes I get stopped by buffalo on my way to work, driving through Wind Cave National Park. That's pretty fun. Ridge sees that on my Instagram, but I'll drive in and, I'll get to Hot Springs, South Dakota, which is a wonderful little small town, and then I'll head into the museum. And usually I'll start by going through different stuff that has been donated to the museum. Most recently, I actually just accessioned some saber-toothed cat skulls from the White River Formation, from the Arna Ranch of the White River. They were actually discovered by Frank Garcia, who is my boss at the World Fossil Finders Museum.
So you're at what museum are you at?
I'm at the World Fossil Finders Museum in Hot Springs, South Dakota. It's actually a brand new museum. We're only a few months old. We opened on June 20th of all dates. So we're brand new, but we're hoping to get into paleontology, with a fighting force. We got the Dream Team working for us. Riley Lawson.
You're part of the Dream Team, and so what do you do specifically? It seems like you do a bunch of stuff.
So I do a lot for the museum. My title is I'm the collections manager and lead natural history researcher, but I do other things like I facilitate partnerships for the museum, whether it be with media or whether it be with different institutions. Like right now, we're discussing some partnerships with some institutions in Canada. I can't say which ones, but that may be pretty cool. And also some ones in Texas as well. Shout out to the Whiteside Museum and Holly Simon. If you guys aren't following her on Instagram, you should definitely check it out.
Okay. I think I do follow her.
Yeah, she's
the Whiteside Museum. Where is that?
Yeah, so that's in Seymour, Texas. I was actually lucky enough to visit in December on my way to the Ozarks, and she actually opened up the museum for me at like 9 p.m. when I got into town and gave me a personal tour.
Oh man, that's cool.
They're doing wonderful work down there. They're also a brand new institution like ours, and what they're doing is a lot of work in the Permian and in the Cenozoic period. They dug up some really fascinating animals. So far, they actually dug up some really cool Dimetrodon. So I don't know if you know what a Dimetrodon is.
Yeah, it's something that looks like a dinosaur, but it's not.
Yeah, so a lot of people...
It's got a big sail.
Exactly, yeah. So just like Spinosaurus, a lot of people get really confused that Dimetrodon is a dinosaur. It's actually kind of a joke among paleontologists. Well, that's not a dinosaur, that's a Permian reptile. But actually what it is a synapsid, which is really cool because that means we're related to it. Now, synapsid is a mammal-like reptile, and Dimetrodon was fascinating because it was one of the first dominant apex predators in North America, in Pangaea at the time. Okay. So, finding these things is just super cool, but it requires really talented prep skills to actually work through a Dimetrodon skeleton. Because the crazy thing about Dimetrodon is you would think that the spikes would be straight, but they're not. They're curved. They're curved,
really?
Kind of like a bent antenna or a bent wire. They're curved all the way up. And whether that's the taphonomic process, which is how fossils are preserved and what happens after an animal dies, whether it be by that or whether it be by the actual biological structure of the animal, I don't know. But it's a really difficult thing to prep, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for the work they've done there. They're also working with Dr. Bob Bacher, if you guys have ever heard of him.
So, What led you on this path to where you are now? Like, what, as a kid, like how did you, what pulled you in this direction?
So that's actually a really interesting question, and I appreciate you asking that. So, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I actually grew up in the neighborhood in Albuquerque called the War Zone. That is the actual neighborhood in the city. It's now called the International District, but, when I was growing up there, it was called the War Zone. My father died when I was very young, and the only place I'd actually ever seen my father walk, because he was in a wheelchair my whole life, was at the New Mexico Museum of Natural History. So in a lot of ways, the Natural History Museum became my second home. So like a lot of kids would spend at the park with their friends, I was constantly at the museum talking to scientists. Really? I attended my first lecture at the museum and even asked a question and stayed awake the whole time when I was 8. Not 8, when I was 6, and I went to museum camp every summer there, and I think this just goes to show the importance of science education, in the inner city. But I got really into paleontology, and in a lot of ways, reading about paleontology is what helped me through the foster care process and all of the troubles I went through. And, when I was, I dropped out of high school when I was in 9th grade, and I went to a military school. It was called the New Mexico Youth Challenge Academy, and if anybody is looking for solutions for kids who are struggling, the National Guard Challenge Academy program is for you. I highly recommend it. But I was at this military school, and they just shaved all of my hair off, and we had gone through the first 2 weeks of what they call acclimation period.
Acclimation period.
Kind of like where they're screaming at you and you're up 16-hour days running and doing push-ups, and basically welcome to the program. And there was this time where after acclimation had ended and we all became cadets, they all lined us up and boom, 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 they asked us what each of us wanted to be, and they gave us no time to answer.
Really?
Because they wanted an honest answer. And, as a high school dropout who had no prospects of ever, really wanting to achieve this, I didn't even realize that this was still a passion of mine. At the time, I said paleontology. And when I look at the reason why I became this, a lot of the time I put it there. So after that, I graduated from that school and I started going to New Mexico Military Institute. I actually had dreams of becoming an officer in the Army. And that's something that didn't quite work out because I took a cultural anthropology class at New Mexico Military Institute. And it really caught my interest and really rekindled that flame. And after that, I moved to Albuquerque again, and I started studying at the University of New Mexico and at Central New Mexico Community College. And I studied archaeology, and I studied evolutionary anthropology and archaeological theory. And on my 18th birthday, I was 16 when I graduated from my military school. On my 18th birthday, I was there on an excavation digging up a great kiva in Farmington, New Mexico, with San Juan College. So after that, it was just kind of, it moved very quickly. So I went from doing that archaeological excavation to going back to New Mexico, going back to Albuquerque and doing work with the Maxwell Museum of Anthropology, where I did a lot of collections work with archaeological material. Yeah. Really cool stuff like, Southwest pottery, Chacoan Valley stuff, Chaco Canyon material. I was doing all of this, but something didn't quite seem right. I still knew there was something else I wanted to study.
Okay.
And so I started sending out applications, and I must have sent out 500 applications to every natural history museum and every part of the country, even other countries, emailing people, and I got one call back, and that was to the Wyoming Dinosaur Center in Thermopolis. And
really?
So, yeah, Thermopolis, Wyoming.
And you sent like 500 out.
Yeah,
and this is the only one.
Something like that. Yeah, a whole lot. Yeah, paleontology is a notorious job market, and you really have to want it if you want to be in that field. But anyway, I got accepted out to that internship, and I can tell you that was one of the coolest experiences of my life.
Why is that?
Oh, yeah. So I get from Albuquerque, and I'm driving in my beater car with my mom, who's helping me get up there. And we're driving through Utah, and we stop at the Utah Museum of Natural History, and then we're driving.
That's on the University of Utah campus, right?
Yeah, if y'all haven't been there, I highly recommend visiting if it's open right now. I have no idea if it's open, but the Wall of Ceratopsians is actually heavily influenced by one of my mentors. I was driving up to Thermopolis, and we passed through the Wind Cave. Not the Wind Cave, the Wind Canyon in Riverton, Wyoming. And it just blew my mind, and I knew I was on the right track as soon as I saw every single geologic layer of all of my all of the things I'd read about in those books and seen in documentaries as a kid, just there for the first time. And so we roll up to the Wyoming Dinosaur Center, into this beautiful small town. It's got hot springs running right through it, and the Bighorn River is going right through this town. We cross the Bighorn River, and we drive up to this, big corrugated metal building. And my mom's all like, "What's this?" And so I walk inside, and there's a Supersaurus, which is a giant sauropod, long-necked dinosaur, just staring me right in the face. And from there, I was hooked. That same day, I was digging up Camarasaurus fossils with the museum just 5 minutes away, driving out there. They have sites right at their natural history museum, so they dig it up right there.
Right there.
Yeah, it's really cool. So that was such a unique place. So they taught me how to do things like prepare fossils using microscribes. They taught me how to do things like excavate fossils and quarry all around them and trench around and prospect for fossils, which is a funny way of saying hiking up and down badlands, more like sliding up and down badlands and looking for fossils eroding out of the hill. So they're teaching me all of these wonderful skills, and shout out to Bill Wall for being the first paleontologist to train me. He's a paleontologist at the Wyoming Dinosaur Center. He's got an ichthyosaur named after him, which is a marine reptile. From the Jurassic of the UK.
So he's got a dinosaur named after him.
Well, it's not actually a dinosaur. It did live at the same time as a dinosaur. Yeah, it's a common misconception. It's an ichthyosaur, and a lot of people think when they hear saur, it's dinosaur, but not necessarily a dinosaur. It's actually a marine reptile. It kind of looks like a dolphin almost, with this really, really slender snout and kind of fat body, almost like a fish.
Okay.
It's a very strange creature. But I was digging up Camarasaurus fossils, and as soon as I found my first
Camarasaurus, for those that don't know, it's a large sauropod.
Camarasaurus is a huge dinosaur. They actually have a Camarasaurus on its hind legs rearing up outside of the Field Museum. I think there's a mask on it right now. Sometimes I've seen it with like Bears jerseys. I'm sorry, Chicago. I apologize.
So how do we all benefit from the work by people like you?
So, I had trouble answering this question when I was younger, but I think the best way to describe the benefit, understanding of paleontology and its benefit to the community is understanding that paleontology is studying mass extinction events. Okay. So, previous to the, current mass extinction event that we're living in and experiencing here in downtown Chicago, there was several other mass extinction events in Earth's history. And I think paleontology matters now more than ever because understanding how mass extinction events have occurred in the past will better improve our understanding of how to move past and, mitigate the damage of the current situation that we're in and understand what was actually happening. But in a lot of ways, that's just a tiny portion of it. Way more important to me than even understanding climate change is the power paleontology has to grip the imaginations of the public.
That's where I come in, that's for sure.
Exactly, and Rich is a great example of that. Paleontology has this almost supernatural power to draw us into these different ages. When I walk into a museum and I work with a fossil, in a way I feel like I'm time traveling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, or going to a different universe or a different world, an alien planet, because you think about all these different paleo environments that have existed within where we are today. Yeah. They find Tully monsters from the before even the Permian period right here in Chicago.
Yeah.
It's wild. I like to think about all of the grand stories that played out before us, and I think it can actually help us be more humble to understand where we are and how we fit into that grand story as well.
You would appreciate my YouTube browsing history.
I'm sure I would, yeah. Lots of PBS Eons, I hope. Those guys are great.
Smithsonian Channel's got some good ones.
They have some really good ones. Royal Terrell has some good videos on there.
Piggybacking off of what you just said, in the Field Museum is probably my favorite spot in Chicago. And so every time I go there, I go straight to the Evolving Planet. Like, first thing we got to do, whoever I'm with, we got to go to the Evolving Planet. And I take a walk through there, and in this large room with all these big fossils, there's a window that looks over the skyline. So you can see the skyline of Chicago from this window in the Evolving Planet. So I look out into the world and see all these tall buildings and human progress and busyness in a way, and I'm surrounded by all these dead things, and it's like, wow, what a like juxtaposition. It's so interesting. And
is it a juxtaposition, or is it another chapter in that story?
I guess so. That's a good question. That's a good question. When I'm going through this exhibit, it just, like you were saying, it just gets my imagination going, it triggers it. And so I'm wondering, like, I have these ideas of what going on an expedition is like. So I imagine you guys are just out in the middle of nowhere and you're just flying down the highway, you're like listening to metal music, smoking cigarettes, and just hanging out like friends. And I mean, you're doing all the work and stuff, but it just seems like a great hang.
It's a lot of fun, and if you ever come out into the field with me, which I'm going to have you come dig with me in South Dakota, we're going to set that up right after we're done here, and we'll have to have another podcast after that.
Oh, for sure.
But, it's a lot of fun. I love how you say smoking cigarettes and flying down the highway and listening to metal, because that's pretty much what I do. But throw in a little bit of old school gangster rap in there, you know. I throw in a little System of a Down, maybe a little Ministry, maybe a little Iggy Pop, and throw in a little bit of Biggie Smalls, because we're in Chicago, right?
So what are some crazy stories of being out in the field?
Oh, man, I got some zingers. So here's another one from my time in Grand Staircase National Monument in Utah. So we were in the monument for about 8 weeks, and I was the one who was there the longest. So I had got to the museum in September, and I did not leave Grand Staircase until October. Wow. So we were digging there quite a while, and there was this guy who came he came from San Diego, and he's a really great guy, worked at actually one of the same museums I've worked at, not worked at, but they're colleagues of mine in Hot Springs at the Mammoth site. Shout out to Justin Wilkins. And he had actually managed to get lost, and what had happened is, he's a very tall man. He's about, maybe a little under 300 pounds and about 6'7". Very large, awesome guy, the exact kind of guy you want in the field with you. But he had been out prospecting for fossils, and he had fallen down this gully. This 40-foot drop, in between these two badlands, and he had shattered his ankle. So we did not realize this, because we were chiseling out a tyrannosaur, a teratophonius, and using rock saws like they cut cement with, and using, hammers and chisels to try to get this thing out of the ground. And mind you, it's like 100 degrees outside, and everybody's, completely exposed to the elements. So we don't find out that he's not at camp and not prospecting until we get back to camp. And then we're like, oh my gosh, he's not showing up. Is he okay? What's going on? And so we all hop in the bed of the truck, and they're like, anybody who wants to come search, jump in this truck now, because this train's moving out of the station. So I ran and I jumped in the bed of the truck, this flatbed owned by the Denver Museum of Natural Science. And Joe Cerdic is in there, and he's doing all that cool work in Madagascar now. He's at the Denver Museum. And we're all going as fast as we can to try to find this dude before the sun goes down. And it's like 7 and sunset's at 8:20. Yeah. So we get out into the field and we start running and yelling. where are you? Oh my gosh, where are you? And we're running on the top of these ridges, and we're risking falling ourselves. And we hear this echo from way down there, and we see him down in the ground all hurt. And all of us are just like, oh my gosh, we're glad we found you, because this is Grand Staircase, and it's a possibility you need a search party out there. But thank God that we found him.
Wow.
And, then it's the process of getting this dude out. So are we going to call a helicopter from Salt Lake City, or are we going to figure this out? So the great thing about paleontologists is they really like to improvise. It's all improvisation in the field. And, what we use for dinosaurs is these big stretchers, because if you get six people holding a stretcher and you switch them out, you'll be able to carry out a multi-100-pound dinosaur bone out of pretty much anywhere. So we're like, he's no bigger than a giant jacket, which is a term we have for a fossil that's been put in a plaster coat.
Right.
Well, he's no different than a giant jacket, so we'll just have to pull him out of the field. And that was easier. Pull him out of the field. So that was easier said than done. So we went back to the camp, and everybody's drinking and relaxing, and they've all been working outside for like 12 hours or something in the sun, doing hard manual labor like chiseling and quarrying out a dinosaur bone, a dinosaur skeleton. And we're all like, put the beers down or chug them. We need you. It's going to be a long night. And he's like 3 miles out. And in Badlands, that's a long way.
Oh man.
In Chicago, that's a long way. We put this dude on a stretcher, and then each one of us rotated, and we had to have 12 people holding that stretcher.
Wow.
And it took 24
That's more
hours.
like a casket.
Yeah.
When you're taking someone out of a casket.
Well, you know what? I'm glad that we didn't do that. Yeah, but we managed to get him out, and then Joe actually drove this dude back to Denver with no sleep. I was so impressed. Like, this guy's a legend, straight up legend. But if you want a crazy field story, that's a crazy field story.
So, what is it like? Because I'm sure, you've learned about like O.C. Marsh and like Elmer Riggs and Edward Drinker Cope, like all those guys going out west with not the equipment that you guys probably have now.
Well, they got the same stuff I have, because I don't have the money for the other stuff.
It's so wild, like how far technology has come, and
it's crazy.
How much of it is like, how different is it now compared to back then?
So I would describe the science right now as experiencing a renaissance. We have all these new methods of extracting data from a single bone that we never had before.
Okay.
So now we can cut thin sections of bones and look at them under a microscope and see the ontogeny, which is a fancy way of saying the life cycle of this animal. All its birth
like
through its death.
Okay.
Yeah. And now we can do that. A lot of my work actually involves stable isotopic analysis. So today what we can do is we can take some teeth, and I've done this with, Mayan human teeth from the Archaic period to small rodent teeth from the Cenozoic. And we can actually grind up the teeth and put it through a centrifuge and then send it to what's called a mass spectrometer, which will separate the different isotopes which within that tooth, and then it'll give me something called a mass spectrograph, which will give me information about that animal's diet, that animal's climate conditions, and the water where that animal lived. It's really wild. Yeah.
Wow.
We have so many different methods, but paleontology, it's important to understand that it's an infantile science. It's very young. It's less than 200 years old.
Yeah.
And because of that, we are always rearranging and changing what we call phylogenies, which is a fancy way of saying the braided evolutionary stream that is, the evolutionary stream.
Isn't that interesting how it's still that young of a science? And back in the like 1700s, they had like cabinets of curiosity cabinets.
Yeah, the old naturalists. Thomas Jefferson, actually, when I was in Philadelphia at the Ben Franklin Museum, I actually saw a mastodon tooth that Ben Franklin had in his collection that was excavated in his personal effects. So there's nothing more American than paleontology.
Yeah.
But it is extremely young. So it started off with those naturalists. But I think the contributions that are forgotten about paleontology is actually the contributions to understanding what fossils were before Europeans actually even came out west, which is something that's not really commonly talked about. So one of the things I've learned doing archaeology and paleontology and working with people from Pine Ridge Reservation, the Ogallala Lakota Sioux,
Okay.
is I've learned about some of the oral history stories about,
Really?
yeah, it's fascinating. So one of my favorite stories that I think falls into paleontology's purview is the story about how the Black Hills were formed. There was a race, creator wanted humans and the buffalo, the two-legged and the four-legged, to race because the humans did not respect the buffalo, which of course has always been a common trend among human history. And, creator wanted us to race against these buffalo, and not us, the ancestors of these indigenous peoples, which we're all humans. But basically what happened was, these giant, huge buffalo, and in their stories they talk about huge, giant horns on these buffalo and giant sizes of these buffalo. And
wow.
In the fossil record, we can actually look and see exactly what those buffalo were. They're what we call bison latifrons, which you can actually see at your local natural history museum.
So are they bigger than the bison we see?
They're about 3 times bigger than the bison we see. Yeah. Almost a yard between the horns. Wow. Absolutely wild. Huge megafauna. And the story is these buffalo have to race the the two-leggeds all around the Black Hills to create it. And this race is what forms them up into the hills. And so the main buffalo starts running and running and running, the biggest, baddest, hugest buffalo you can imagine. Starts running around the hills, and then a magpie goes into its ear and says, keep running quicker. They're right behind you. Keep running quicker. And the buffalo does this until the buffalo starts to stumble and starts to fall. And so the magpie then goes and flies through. And because of that, the buffalo was lost, the big buffalo, and then the humans and the buffalo could no longer talk. There's that story, and then there's actually another story that we have an exhibit on at my Natural History Museum that I think is pertinent to pure shale mosasaurs in South Dakota. So there's a story about a creature called Unchecula.
And mosasaurs, they're in the water.
Yeah, mosasaurs lived in the western interior seaway in the Cretaceous and Jurassic period. They were really cool. They're relatives of snakes. They went extinct when the dinosaurs went extinct, but they're huge marine reptiles. If you ever saw Jurassic World, that's the giant thing in the tank that eats the dinosaur at the end. That's a mosasaur.
What do you think about Jurassic World making it like way bigger than it was, and just like in dinosaurs in general in the movies?
So I'm not the biggest fan of that. I also don't like the fact that they chose to put in a hybrid dinosaur.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
It's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
We found so many awesome dinosaurs since then, and I feel like those dinosaurs deserve their credence. I don't think Jurassic World is all bad, because I think anything that gets kids interested in paleontology, or adults for that matter interested in paleontology, is awesome. And I can understand why they wanted to make these things bigger, but I feel like it would have been just as breathtaking to put a Tylosaurus there, which is the largest mosasaur. I mean, this thing's not small. It's larger than any living, reptile today. So, it's this giant creature. So I'm not the biggest fan of that, but I also think it's all right. It's easily fixed with a tour at the Natural History Museum.
It's easily fixed, yeah. What about so you have the American West, which is a great area for paleontology, Patagonia in South America, Gobi Desert in China. Are there other areas in the world that are great for paleontology?
Yes, there is, and one of my personal favorite areas is the Karoo Basin in South Africa. So a lot of the people I've met at conferences over the years, and I've actually became really good friends with the people at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And what they do is they actually study the Permian-Triassic boundary in the Karoo Basin, and they find these things called gorgonopsids, which are these huge mammal-like reptiles, and you can actually go see South African gorgonopsids at the Smithsonian Institution right now in the new exhibit. Well, I don't know right now, but
Yeah.
whenever the museum's open, you can see those. I highly recommend it. But they dig up this fascinating period of history that before that area was discovered, we had no idea where that boundary was, because there's no outcrop of these formations in the United States or in the West. So what they do is they go out there and they study how it transitioned in one of Earth's worst mass extinction events into the age of the dinosaurs. So that is the very first page in the story of the dinosaurs, and that's why I think it is a really fascinating area.
Oh. What's the coolest thing you've found on an expedition?
It's a really tough question, because I've found a lot of really cool stuff. I mean, just recently finding opium pipes digging up 1870s Chinatown in Deadwood was pretty fascinating.
Really?
Oh yeah, still had residue on it. I found a full whiskey bottle too. You can see that video on my Instagram. But I guess the coolest thing, and man, it's so hard to choose one because so much stuff has been awesome. I give a few honorable mentions to the articulated ankylosaur tail club that we found in Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah. I dug that up with Mike Getty, who's now deceased. But that was really cool. But still to this day, I think my personal favorite find was a 3-foot-long extinct carnivorous giant squid from the Western Interior Seaway. It was a squid pen, so the body of the squid, the cartilage had fossilized, and it was 3 foot long. We thought it was petrified wood when we first found it, and then we found what may have been part of an ink sac, and then we realized that this was something else. And so we excavated this, and that was the first ever excavation that I ever led myself with a good friend of mine, Ethan Jennings, who also led that expedition. In fact, he was the one who discovered that site and set up everything with the rancher. So I was more of just, his assistant almost at that time. We had worked together at the Wyoming Dinosaur Center. But yeah, we hiked out there and dug this thing up and put it on a jacket and then, tied it up to a horse, and I rode the horse out of there, and we put it in the back of my Hyundai Santa Fe. And then we drove it to the School of Mines and Technology, the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology Museum of Geology. That's a mouthful. And we donated it to them, and they actually prepared it. It was on a famous pure shale ranch. It's actually Kenny Brown's pure shale ranch, and he actually has a mosasaur named after him.
Really?
Mosasaurus Ken Brown Eye. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was probably my favorite find. A giant carnivorous squid from an ocean that's no longer there.
That's awesome. Okay, so I've been to a number of natural history museums. American Natural History in New York, Field Museum here, Denver, Mammoth Hot Springs, Dinosaur National Monuments, what's the University of Utah, that one, natural history. Do you have, what's, in your opinion, the best natural history museum in America?
Wow, that's a tough question. Now, I have to say, my natural history museum is my personal favorite.
Of course.
The World's Fossil Finders Museum is pretty great. Y'all should all come visit. But my personal favorite natural history museum will have to be the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science in Albuquerque. I just love the way the museum is spread out, where you can walk through the entire geological history of the Earth from the Archean period when it was being formed to our current age, all the way through. I just love the way that museum is designed. I grew up at that museum. I worked at that museum in the lab and as an educator. And, I have friends who work at that museum, and their mounts are just so dynamic. They have a really cool stand cast in there. They have the Bistahi which is a tyrannosaur from the San Juan Basin of New Mexico, from the Cretaceous, the 70 million years ago.
Wow.
From the Laramidian Coastway, which is the continent that all of the dinosaurs that are really famous come from, because North America was split into 2 continents during the age of the dinosaurs. It was Laramidia and Appalachia. So Bistahi comes from the beach of Laramidia. So we have that. We have a Pelycosaur, which is an early Permian reptile that ate plants, and it's articulated, which is laid out the way the animal would have been, mounted almost like you would have seen at a museum, laid out like that in stone. We have the Ghost Ranch Coelophysis block that has evidence of cannibalism within dinosaurs.
Really?
Yeah. It is just a really fascinating place, and that's just the stuff on display. The stuff in collections will blow your mind. They have Diplodocus vertebra, formerly known as Seismosaurus. It's no longer a valid taxa, but they have a Diplodocus vertebra that's bigger than me. Now, granted, I'm 5'6", it's not too hard to get taller than me, but still, it's pretty awesome. They have a 10-foot slab that is just amphibian skulls from the Triassic, just one after the other, just hundreds of them. Yeah. They have, early Gomphothere, baby Gomphothere, it's an early elephant. They have pretty much anything you could want or need, and they have the best early preserved elephant material in the country from the Espanilla Basin of New Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, you should go down to Albuquerque and visit the museum and get yourself a chicharrones burrito at El Modelo.
What's New Mexico like? I've driven through it on a Greyhound bus, and the bus broke down, and I spent 3 hours on the side of a road. And I remember just being so disappointed, because I always thought, like, in the desert, everything's always warm and sunny, and there was snow on the ground, and it was cold, and I just hated it. So what's New Mexico, the rest of New Mexico like? I feel like the native culture is so vibrant and still present.
So New Mexico, my heart will always be in Albuquerque and always be in New Mexico, because New Mexico is such a culturally fascinating place from the rest of the country, and I really don't think it gets the credit it deserves. Very underappreciated, I think. New Mexico has the highest Native American population in the nation. It is the only state outside of Hawaii that has a non-white majority population. It's very, very diverse. The food there is to die for. If you guys have never had Hatch green chilies, I highly recommend it. New Mexican food is like nothing else you've ever tried. It's a mix of indigenous Puebloan food traditions and early Spanish influence. So you have a lot of chilies, a lot of corn, beans, and rice, a lot of pork, a lot of tamales. In Albuquerque, it's completely, normal for a lady to approach you and somebody's abuelita or something to approach you in a Walmart parking lot and sell tamales to you. And I buy them every time because they're the best food you can get. Albuquerque has such a youthful and exuberant vibe about it. You have so many different artists and musicians and, people who work in film there. They make more movies in New Mexico than they do in Los Angeles. Albuquerque, yeah. Netflix is headquartered in Albuquerque. NBC Universal is building. Netflix built $1 billion studio there. NBC Universal.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, they built all this stuff, and so Albuquerque is really getting discovered. Santa Fe is really cool there. They have
what's cooler, Santa Fe or Albuquerque?
Albuquerque, because Santa Fe is a little hoity-toity for my taste. But Santa Fe is really cool because Santa Fe is the oldest capital in the United States, and it was built in the 1600s. I believe it was in 1606 Santa Fe was founded. And you can actually go and walk the original plaza and see the adobe architecture in that's been there since the 1600s. And for history nerds like ourselves, if you go to the Palace of the Governors, you can see excavations. You can see all the areas they've excavated and all the different layers. And in the United States, you don't really get that. That's more common in Europe, but that's what I really recommend about Santa Fe. It's artistically gorgeous in New Mexico. I mean, that's why you have people like Georgia O'Keeffe out there coming from Taos and coming from Ghost Ranch, and Neil Patrick Harris is from there. All sorts of really amazing people come out of the city of Albuquerque. I mean, Jim Morrison actually saw a car crash on the Native American reservation in New Mexico when his father was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base. And that's when he believed a Native American had entered his soul, which I don't know if I believe that, but it influenced his art, and I love his art. So
the Doors, dude, I love the Doors.
Yeah, I love the Doors too, man. Albuquerque has that Doors history. I think Ray Manzarek actually lives in Santa Fe. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you've been in like a couple films, or you've been doing some stuff, right?
So yeah, I dabbled a little bit in the New Mexico film industry. The great thing about paleontology is it's a difficult job market, so you're not always working. So at the time, I was going to the University of New Mexico and studying evolutionary anthropology and working in the Smith Lab as a research volunteer and doing heavy-duty research on the last 22,000 years. I can't really talk about that yet. That is still ongoing. That's a partnership with the University of Texas, Austin, by the way, so that's a cool one.
Okay.
But I got into the New Mexico film industry from my friend Emily Seiler, who goes by Emmy Rain. She was an actress on Too Old to Die Young, which was a film. Which was a Amazon original television show that was filmed in Albuquerque, and it was directed by the same guy who made Drive. So it was really cool, and she introduced me to the right people, and so I started doing background work. My first background project was amazing. I had just flown in from Denver on an excavation, and the next day I'm going on set to News of the World, which I cannot tell you guys too much about, but it's a Western with Tom Hanks. It's based on a book, and it's going to be premiering on December 25th. I can't tell you guys anymore, but December 25th is the busiest film day of the year, so it's going to be good. I can tell you that. I worked on the Fox show Deputy, which is now canceled, but that was a lot of fun. I worked on that show a lot, and I was actually contacted by AMC and by Netflix to be an archaeologist on Better Call Saul. Season 5, Episode 5 of Better Call Saul. And so what I actually did is they told me, hey, so we want you to come on and do a scene with us. We want you to brush off an artifact, and we want you to, be in the background while he's digging. But my job was also to go and make sure everything was correct.
Right.
Yeah, so I was also working as a kind of like somebody who's contracted out to get authenticity on set.
Right.
So that was a lot of fun. I got to talk to Bob Odenkirk about Gomphotheres, and I'm sure, as you guys already know, they're my favorite crazy elephants. They have 4 tusks. They're wild. They're like duck-billed elephants. They're intense, but that was a really fun time. And then from all of those different opportunities, I was actually called in to work as a prop assistant on a movie that's still in post-production right now, and it's a Lifetime film.
Nice.
So I wish I could tell you the story about my first day on set, but we'll have to wait if that ever premieres.
Premieres, yeah.
So, but that was a lot of fun. I got to work with Jeffrey Welsh, which has done all sorts of stuff with Cosmos, and my job was a prop assistant, and I was hired because I know how to work with museum material.
Yeah.
And working as a prop assistant or a prop master is actually not too different than working as a collections manager, because you're always managing the transference and use of different objects. And the cool thing about working in props is you actually might make something or put something on camera that then in turn gets to be put in a museum. So for me, I nerd out about that.
Wow, yeah. So is it Gomphothere?
A Gomphothere, yeah.
A Gomphothere. Is that your favorite extinct animal?
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. So a Gomphothere is the earliest relative. A Gomphotherem productum is the earliest relative of proboscideans in North America that we know of. Now we can trace our evolutionary chain all the way back to Egypt with an animal named Phiomia, and that's, we're talking 30 million years old at this point, right? But Gomphotheres, they came into North America, and what I really like about them is Gomphotherium productum persisted for 7 million years in the Espanola Basin. Just think about that. We've been around for 300,000 years at the highest estimate that we have today. And Gomphotherium productum survived. This elephant survived for 7 million years. The normal geologic lifespan for a mammal is 3 million years.
Really?
And it's because of the success of this animal that we had things like the Columbian mammoth and Stegomastodon.
That's the biggest, right? Columbian mammoth?
Actually, the biggest one is Paleoloxodon. It comes from Europe. It's actually even bigger than a Calicothere, which is an ancestor of horses. It's the largest land mammal that ever lived. It's a huge, massive elephant.
Which one is this? What is this?
Paleoloxodon.
This is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Yeah, it's kind of an unsung hero, but it comes from areas like the Baltic area. So you find them in the Czech Republic and in those other countries are escaping my mind. I'm not a geographer, but you find them in that region of the world.
So you're pretty close to Mammoth Hot Springs.
I am, yeah. So Mammoth Hot Springs is about 2 minutes away from my museum. We're right around the corner.
Describe Mammoth Hot Springs for people.
Oh, the Mammoth Hot Springs is a really cool place. So what happened is there was these hot springs with this mud. And what happened is because these hot springs were warm, all of this green grass would grow all around it. All these green grass and lush different types of plants that elephants, like mammoths, like to eat. But you can't go there because an animal as heavy as a mammoth just starts to fall into the mud and sink down into it, and it's kind of like the Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles that way. All of the elephants, all of the mammoths found at the mammoth site have all been young bull mammoths, young adults.
Really?
And the reason why they're all young bull mammoths is because elephant herds kick out the young bulls who become aggressive and reach sexual maturity until they can relax, and they have to go to a different, different group. And because they these young bulls don't have their mothers around them to guide them away from the hot springs with the nice green grass in the middle of the Ice Age winter, these mammoths come and eat the grass and then slide in and become perfectly preserved. And the best thing about the Mammoth Hot Springs is you can see the head of a mammoth and you can see every single bone all the way to the end of the tail laid out in the ground, not even excavated out. It's all sitting there and it's amazing. It's a huge bone bed.
So what you're saying is that in mammals, without their mothers, guys are stupid and they make mistakes.
Well, I mean, in my own life, I can tell you that.
Without mother's guidance, you're in tough mud there.
Hey, but everybody's got to learn. You got to sink or swim, literally.
Yeah, I've been there. It's so wild that it's just this massive. So it's this site that a building is erected around it, and volunteers and people work daily.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they still have like 50 years to like dig it all up.
Yeah, it's going to take them a really long time to excavate all of it, and I don't know if they'll ever actually be able to do it. It's kind of a monumental task, but it's what I call a living natural history museum. So if you go and visit, you can actually see people working there doing paleontology right there, right in person. And the great thing about the Mammoth site is it's also one of the biggest hirers of volunteers and interns who are undergraduates are interested in paleontology. So a lot of the people that are significant in the field today have passed through the Mammoth site.
Wow.
It's a great museum. And the people who run it are just so talented.
So I imagine you've been to the Brea Tar Pits?
I have been to the La Brea Tar Pits.
What's that like?
Oh, it's breathtaking, and when I was there, I was actually lucky enough to have one of Emily Lindsay's, which is the curator of the La Brea Tar Pits. One of her staff, one of her preparators, actually showed me some of the stuff that they were actually preparing in the lab, and they showed me some of the collections. And the La Brea Tar Pits has preservation quality that is unreal. Now, the crazy thing about those bones is some of them aren't even fossils. Some of them are still the biological material, because it's a lot like the peat moss bogs in Ireland that preserve it, or the mud that preserves the column of Venice. It's the same thing going on with the bones in the La Brea Tar Pits. So the information we can garner from these animals is even more significant than being able to find their bones anywhere else. It really is a unique place. They find California condors there. They find direwolves there. They have an entire wall of direwolves. They find, saber-toothed cats like Smilodon californicus, which is named after California, and they find short-faced bears. I mean, anything that's a famous Cenozoic mammal, it comes from the La Brea Tar Pits. And the cool thing about La Brea is all the bones are this beautiful jet black color. And so whenever you're at a museum and you see a cat skeleton, you know it's based on a La Brea skeleton if it's nice and jet black.
Really? Interesting.
Beautiful preservation quality. We get really excited about the preservation of quality of fossils as paleontologists. Yeah.
What about the Midwest here? We're in the Midwest. Anything like big, and I mean we have woolly mammoth coming out of here, but anything else that?
So the mastodon at my Natural History Museum, which is the most complete female mastodon ever found, was dug up by the University of Michigan in Michigan, of course. But you find all sorts of crazy animals. In the Cleveland Shale, people like Lee Hall, who's now at the Museum of the Rockies, dug up Dunkleostes, which is a giant bone-crushing fish.
Whoa.
It's absolutely wild. Its jaws look like scissors. It's absolutely insane. That's from even before the Permian period. Here in Chicago, you can find things like a Tully monster, which is just the weirdest Rick and Morty-esque fossil you'll ever see. It really it's just very strange. It has like a snout with a little mouth, and it doesn't have any eyes, and it's just weird. It looks like a piece of fruit almost. It's very strange. You can find lots of ancient buffalo bones out here. You can find Bison antiquus, and you can find Bison occidentalis and Bison latifrons out here. Of course, you can find mastodons out here. When you get into... So, unfortunately, the reason why there's not dinosaurs in this part of the country, which is probably what you're asking about...
The glaciers?
It's because of the glaciation that occurred. So, what happens with glaciers is they just come and they crush off everything. And so people actually have, a theory that the Great Unconformity is actually caused by Snowball Earth, which was glaciers.
The what? The Great what?
The Great Unconformity, which is a bunch of few billion years of geologic history that's just missing. And that's when Earth was completely covered by glaciers.
That sounds like an indie band name. The Great Unconvention? What is it? The
Great Unconformity. I think it sounds like a great punk band.
That's a great name. So you have all these years missing. So then is the trade-off that we don't get dinosaur fossils in the Midwest, but we get the Great Lakes out of it?
So the cool thing about the Great Lakes is the archaeological significance of the Great Lakes is very, very important to all of the Plains peoples. So originally all of the Lakota and all of the Chippewa and, all of those tribes from out west, they all trace their ancestry back here to the Great Plains, to the Great Lakes region. So around Minnesota, around the Illinois area, around the Michigan area. So what you lack in paleontology, you actually gain in the study of archaeology.
People.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's some really significant roots out here.
Wow. Awesome. What's the most recent, biggest dinosaur discovery? I imagine It's the Spinosaurus.
So I'm a little hesitant to clap my hands every time I see a Spinosaurus reconstruction come out, because Spinosaurus is getting reconstructed every year. It's literally become a meme among paleontologists.
No one really knows what it looks like, and then
there's a lot of
in
theories.
The water a little bit more.
Everybody's debating what Spinosaurus looks like, and just like everything else, these questions will be answered with a bigger sample size. Now, the frustrating thing about trying to conduct biology research with paleontology and ecology research with paleontology is because less than 1% of everything that's ever lived has been fossilized, and a very, very, very small percentage of those fossils make up a diverse enough actual count for us to get comprehensive data. And with things like large predatory animals that come from unstable regions of the world, it is difficult to get sample sizes expanded. But there's some amazing people who have been doing work in Egypt, female and male paleontologists. Their names are escaping me right now. I wish I could say them, but there's a lot of research coming out. One of my personal favorite pieces of work that's come out lately was the discovery of the new titanosaur, the new sauropod down in Patagonia.
Tell me more about that one.
So this is the largest dinosaur that ever lived. I believe it's Argentinosaurus. And Diego Pull at the American Museum of Natural History did a lot of the work with a institution, I think they're based in Buenos Aires, and they studied this animal and they excavated all of its bones, and they did body mass regressions, and what they actually discovered is this was the largest largest land animal ever. Yeah, this thing was like a walking city block, pretty much. And it was heavy and it was bulky, and there must have been massive herds of these things all over the place. Patagonia during the early Cretaceous period must have been a fascinating place.
Well, kind of wrapping up here, what are some favorite things you're looking forward to in the next 5 years in the work that you're doing?
So I'm looking forward to presenting my research in 2021 on the Hall's Cave project, which is a record of the last 22,000 years. Hopefully I'll be either presenting it at the American Society of Mammalogy annual meeting or at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology annual meeting, God willing. Of course, let's hope that it's not canceled. So I'm excited for that. But really, I'm excited to see what kind of research comes out of the Karoo Basin of South Africa. And I'm also really excited to see some of the new ecology research that's being done in the Hell Creek Formation. So that's the late Cretaceous, and we're learning more and more about that. And I'm also really fascinated in hearing more research about the Fort Union Formation, which is a formation that represents the age directly after the KT mass extinction. And the Denver Museum recently found thousands, not thousands, but a very large amount of early mammal skulls in concretions in the Rocky Mountains from that age. So I'm really excited to see what kind of information that brings, because as I stated at the beginning of the podcast, I think learning about how an Earth heals from a mass extinction event is some of the most important data we can actually garner. So,
awesome. Well, Tim, this has been such a treat. Thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me.
Yeah, I had a blast. Thanks for having me out here, man. We'll have to do this again soon. You'll definitely be out there digging up fossils with me. That I promise.
I have a 50 before 50 list. And one of them is to go on a expedition.
Yeah, we'll go a place. I know a place where it's about 2 ranches away from where Sue was found, and we can go and dig up T-Rex teeth.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And T-Rex shed their teeth like sharks, so who knows? Maybe one of those could be Sue's. It's entirely possible. So yeah, we'll do that.
One last question I have: Do you own fossils, and how many do you own?
I don't really have a personal fossil collection, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the an ethical way of managing commercial paleontology. I think, with the current economic state of the country and 1 in 3 museums expected to close, I think there needs to be more collaboration between people on the public and private side of the spectrum. And I think there needs to be ethical guidelines set in place for the sale, transfer, and excavation of fossils in the private market. But I personally do not own any fossils. All of my fossils are in museum collections.
Talk more about that relationship. I read a good book, The Dinosaur Artist. It talks about this relationship between commercial and like public and how, just talk about that.
Yeah, so Frank Garcia, my boss, is actually mentioned in the Dinosaur Artist. He's in, I believe, it's one of the early chapters, but he was the guy who found the Lacey Shell Pit in Florida. He has always skirted the line between public and private.
Wait, Frank Garcia?
Yes, Frank Garcia. Yeah, that's
he's
him.
like heavily mentioned in that book.
Yeah, he's heavily mentioned in that book. And, there's a lot of political opinions and a lot of emotions on both sides when it comes to the transference of fossils. I do not believe that it's ethical to sell a fossil that is holotype, or a scientifically valuable fossil. But when it comes to things like, ammonites and even really common vertebrates like oreodonts, where you find thousands of these things, and we already have sample sizes that are sufficient to do any ecological research we could ever want or need, I think that is okay. I think there really needs to be a conversation about how to move forward together between those two sides. And in the future I see in paleontology, the future I want, I would like to return to how it was when these great museums were built, where they would send people out and, it was aristocratic people who would, manage excavations and, donate fossils to things like the Field Museum and the American Museum. And, there's also a lot of questions about how ethical that was. So I think there needs to be a conversation about the ethics of creating fossils, and I think of selling fossils, and I think there needs to be guidelines set in place. But I don't think it's a bad thing to ever own a fossil, because I think they are the most important. Having a fossil is the most important way, or the best way, to understand the ancient world. And I think every kid should have a fossil. That's how I feel.
I love it.
And I'll probably get heat for a little bit of this, but I feel like it's possible to coexist. But there's people who don't share that opinion in establishment paleontology. So
I would agree with you. I think the more collaboration in not just paleontology, but every field out there in the world, I think the world can only be a better place from it.
Yeah, some of the best field collectors and some of the best field workers I've ever seen in my life have been commercial paleontologists. And some of the smartest and most talented and brilliant people I've ever had the pleasure to work with have been academic paleontologists. And it would just be so nice to see both of those two skill sets, benefit each other instead of, go against each other.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't think dinosaurs should be only for the rich either.
I agree. Well, thanks for the conversation. What a treat.
Yeah, this has been a blast. I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the summer.
Thanks for listening to Rich Conversations. Again, you can follow Tim at DinoGuy1997. I hope the rest of your day is filled with childlike imagination and a willingness to explore your curiosity. Have a wonderful day.